The Red Bull Ring hosts its final race in the 2026 season with a race that really won't go down in history for how spectacular it was, but it will because we've seen different things with the various updates that the teams have brought for this Grand Prix. So maybe the results haven't really changed much from the tone of the season, but what could come next might turn out to be much more interesting. The race in the forests of Styria has ended, but ladies and gentlemen, for us, it's time to sum up the most important things that round number 8 of the Formula 1 World Championship has left us. The Grand Prix at the Red Bull Ring didn't give us any surprises before the race started in terms of penalties, but we did have a qualifying session with a very controversial result. And in the last attempt at a fast lap, Verstappen went into the wall at the penultimate corner of the circuit. And this caused yellow flags, but no double yellow flags were issued, only a single yellow flag. And while Antonelli slowed down, Russell only reduced his speed as much as necessary and with that managed to secure pole position. And he didn't receive any kind of penalty since the FIA interpreted that he slowed down as required by the regulations, so they didn't even bother to investigate the British driver's action. So the pole position went to George Russell, who beat Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, who would be right behind him at the start of the Grand Prix, with Antonelli in 4th position. So for the British driver, it was a perfect opportunity to close the gap in the fight for the 2026 World Championship, which made for a very interesting scenario, with Ferrari aiming for victory in this Grand Prix and Mercedes looking to regain their dominant form, and waiting to see how Antonelli could make a comeback and what Verstappen could do to try to move up further on the grid. All of this would be resolved little by little on Sunday, and with high temperatures and a track that's demanding on the tires, we could expect just about anything once the race began. And once the cars lined up on the starting grid, the lights on the traffic signal would go out. And with that, the Austrian Grand Prix would begin. Russell defends the lead very well, not allowing any threat from Leclerc in these opening stages. But at the back, Antonelli looked like he had the Mario Kart mushroom, the one that lets you skip corners, because the Italian went wide both at turn 1 and at turn 3. This happens with track limits, since the FIA is a bit more permissive with track limits on the first lap of the race. But while Antonelli was struggling with these first corners, going wide, we saw the Ferraris battling and Hamilton overtaking Leclerc to move into second, leaving the Monegasque exposed, who was quickly attacked on the exit. In fact, the Italian ends up overtaking him in turn 1, but since the guy was still struggling, he goes wide again in that corner, so he has to give up his attack, let Leclerc through, Leclerc overtakes him, and Max even takes advantage to squeeze in and send the young Italian down to 5th position in the race. But so much corner cutting was drawing a lot of attention, and it turns out that Antonelli seemed to be having a problem with brake temperature, which didn't allow him to brake comfortably, and for a good part of the race, he struggled a lot with this particular issue. But by this point, Antonelli had already lost positions, so he would have to try to recover to get closer to the podium, or even try to fight with his teammate if there was an opportunity later in the race. He catches up to Charles Leclerc again and overtakes him on lap 8. However, Leclerc bumped him when moving over, hitting the floor. This Barcelona Grand Prix and circuit were going to be very challenging for them, because at this point, not only was Leclerc not showing pace, but Hamilton was already being pressured by Max Verstappen, who was dangerously closing in on his second place. By lap 9, he gets into the overtake detection zone and the Dutchman. After spending a few laps behind the Brit, on lap 11 he goes for the inside at turn 3 to take the position. He does it, but we have a yo-yo style duel causing him to run out of battery, and Hamilton takes advantage of it to throw the car down the next straight, managing to keep the position, but Verstappen doesn't give up, and they give us a beautiful side-by-side through the following corners where Hamilton manages to keep the position despite the attack from the driver, 4-time world champion. But a lap later, seeing the situation, they end up bringing the Briton into the pits early, who comes in to gamble on a 3-stop strategy. This became quite clear after stopping so early in the race. All this while Antonelli was dangerously closing in on both Hamilton's and Max's positions, taking advantage of the battle they were having. Ferrari also anticipates Leclerc's stop by pitting on lap 14, and by this point the Cadillacs had already retired from the race due to reliability issues related to temperature, making this a completely disastrous weekend for the American team. The rest of the team stayed on track, extending their first stint, but as Verstappen closed in on George Russell, they moved the stop up to lap 18. This put them behind Lewis Hamilton, but with much fresher tires. And after having closed the gap to George Russell, who ends up pitting on lap 19 to try to protect himself from the undercut, Antonelli meanwhile extended his first stint. And he really could have had a chance to come out second after his stop if it hadn't been for terrible timing and really bad luck. Because on lap 25, Carlos Sainz's car stopped on track due to a reliability problem. And this forced a virtual safety car, but this Williams car failure happened just as Antonelli was already in the pits. So he goes through the normal pit stop, and when he comes out and rejoins the track, that's when the virtual safety car ends up coming out. So essentially he doesn't gain anything at all and comes out behind both Leclerc, Hamilton, and Verstappen. But the one who does take advantage of these neutralizations is Hamilton, whose team brings him into the pits to put on soft tires. Like I said, Ferrari thought that if the three-stop strategy worked in Barcelona, why wouldn't it work here? But things don't go so well for the Italian team. Why? The British driver even comes out behind Hadjar and Piastri on soft tires and is forced to overtake if he wants to regain positions. After a few laps, the virtual safety car ends, and at this moment we saw Antonelli start pressuring Leclerc again to take back third place, which he manages to do on lap 30 to move into third in this race and finally get onto the podium. Meanwhile, Hadjar is overtaken by Hamilton, who loses a lot of time in those maneuvers, making it clear that the strategy they chose was a complete failure. Piastri also overtook Leclerc on lap 37. As Leclerc tried to recover, he had to let Hamilton by, since Hamilton was faster and on a different strategy. Obviously, he had to regain positions. After the strategic mistake, the guy decides to defend his position, delaying even more Lewis Hamilton's possible attempt to recover the podium spot. Leclerc, for his part, would pit on lap 38, but his stop was very early, so we all knew that the next stint would end up being a nightmare for the Monegasque, having to stay out on track for a long time with those tires, which obviously confirmed that Ferrari messed up strategically. So essentially, what happened in Barcelona was just an illusion. Here we've seen Ferrari back in all its glory. What was interesting about this race, besides Ferrari's mental collapse, was seeing that Verstappen was closing in aggressively and dangerously on Russell's position, getting to just over a second away, almost within range to try and attack with overtake mode, but seeing the threat. Mercedes decides to bring Russell in early for a pit stop on lap 44, one lap after Hamilton and Piastri had already pitted again. With this, they protect themselves from an undercut by Verstappen because just as he was hunting down Russell, he was being hunted by Antonelli, who had already made up a huge amount of time. By lap 49, the Italian was under a second behind, while Verstappen reported he had no tires left. So before giving the Mercedes driver a chance to overtake him, they bring him into the pits on lap 49. And here Mercedes lost a golden opportunity because if they had tried an undercut one lap earlier with Kimi, he could have come out ahead of Max Verstappen. Either way, when he comes out, Max ends up almost 10 seconds behind Russell, and Antonelli stops on lap 51, ending up about 6 seconds behind Max Verstappen. So both of them would have about 20 laps left to try to go after Russell, which looked very difficult at that particular point. During that time, we saw some battles that weren't a big deal. Hamilton regained positions by overtaking Leclerc again, while Norris also passed him, dropping the Monegasque driver to 8th. With a completely failed strategy where he had to make another pit stop to finish the race. But Hamilton was no longer able to go after Oscar Piastri, who held on to 4th place. And that's how the midfield battle ended, where up front, Verstappen was once again closing in on Russell, but not enough to threaten his position in the final laps. Andrea Kimi Antonelli was the one who really came charging, and on the final lap, he managed to get within less than a second of Max Verstappen. He was able to use the overtake mode, but didn't have a clear chance to overtake, so he was just one real lap away from probably having a real opportunity to pass the Dutch driver. But this didn't stop Russell from winning the Austrian Grand Prix from start to finish on lap 71 and reclaiming victory after several months without it. Second victory of the season for George Russell, who returns to the top step of the podium after almost 4 months since his last win, which obviously helps to recover valuable points. 10, especially in the fight for the title, but where he still has a lot of work ahead to catch up with his Italian teammate. The rest of the top 10 of the Austrian Grand Prix would finish as follows. Second place for Verstappen, who is starting to show potential to make a comeback in this 2026. Third place for Kimi, who, despite bad luck in qualifying and the brake problem, managed to rescue a podium finish. Fourth place for a solid Oscar Piastri. Fifth place for Lewis Hamilton. Sixth place for Isaac Hadjar. Seventh position for Lando Norris in a weak weekend on his part. Eighth place for Charles Leclerc, closing out a disaster for Ferrari this weekend. Ninth place and a good race for Liam Lawson, and closing out the top 10 Arvid Lindblad, securing a double points finish for the Racing Bulls team. I think today, by far, we've had the weakest race of 2026 except for some spectacular duels like Hamilton with Verstappen or Maxi Antonelli's chase against Russell. But honestly, we've had little action over the 71 laps at the Red Bull Ring. Few memorable battles, most of them decided by super clipping issues, batteries, yo-yo style battles, and those kinds of things that I personally don't like. And I have to admit that I didn't enjoy this Grand Prix that much in particular, but I don't know if it's because I was expecting more, but I felt that the little that happened in the race really wasn't a big deal. My rating will be a 5 boring race. We'll see if things get better for the British Grand Prix. My drivers of the day this time are the 3 on the podium, but I especially want to highlight the performance of Max Verstappen, who bounced back after yesterday's accident and showed a lot of pace. Where maybe, if it hadn't been for the accident, today we might have seen Max Verstappen with a better chance of winning at his team's home circuit. And my disappointment of the day can only be Scuderia Ferrari, because what a disastrous race. Nothing worked for them, their top speed is still killing them, and now they failed where they shined in Barcelona. What was the deal? With the tires. Temperatures were still high, but the strategy was heartbreaking. What they did to Leclerc was awful, and what happened with Hamilton was ridiculous, because not only was the pace not the same, but with that strategy, they even ended up taking him out of 4th place. We were expecting a Ferrari that would challenge Mercedes again, but the reality is that once more, their weekend in Barcelona seems to have been just a small mirage in a season that still hasn't come together for the Italian Scuderia. But ladies and gentlemen, with this we finish the summary of the 2026 Austrian Grand Prix of Formula 1. But this is where I ask you, what did you think of the race? How would you rate it personally? And obviously let me know who your drivers and disappointments of the day were at the 2026 Austrian Grand Prix of Formula 1. Let me know all your opinions in the comments section. That's all from me. I'll say goodbye by telling you that if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications so you know when I'm uploading a new video, and share this with your friends. Please follow us on Instagram and Twitter. The links are in this video's description. See you soon for more content on your Skyline Racing channel. Thank you for tuning in and see you later.